On August 23, 1989, a 16-year-old black youth by the name of Yusef Hawkins was murdered by a mob of 30 whites, armed with bats and a gun, in Bensonhurst, a predominantly white neighborhood in Brooklyn. One member of the white group shot Yusef Hawkins twice in the chest, then left him to bleed to death on the sidewalk, solely because he was black. This stirred up mixed emotions and raised many questions that youth all over New York want answers to. Hi, I'm Sean Hall from the Through Our Eyes Video and History Project. We got together and made this video documentary, hoping it will answer our questions and maybe some of yours too, concerning racial violence. We also hope that after viewing our tape, we, the young generation, can come up with actions we can take now to prevent racial violence in our present and in our future. Maybe then we can make a better way for our generation and the new generation that's yet to come.
Hello, my name is Harrigan, and I'm also part of the Through Our Eyes Video and History Project. The other students and I wondered why this problem of racism still exists today in the U.S. And to find out about this problem, we talked to an historian at Columbia University. Professor Foner tied racism to slavery.
Slavery is deeply embedded in our economy from the very early days of the colonial period in the 17th century. And when you have an economy based upon the enslavement of a group, a racial justification for that is going to develop. Slavery is justified because, they said, Africans are inferior. They only can really produce, work productively as slaves. They, if not put into slavery, they will become barbarians, as allegedly they were in Africa. So this idea was used to justify slavery. The stronger slavery got, the more slavery grew, the more racism developed as a justification for slavery. The problem was, in the colonial period, it was very hard to attract free laborers to come voluntarily to work in the colonial America. And they tried, first they tried Indians, they tried indentured servants, they tried various kinds of labor, but they found it very difficult to get enough labor to do the work they wanted to do. And eventually they turned to slavery, which is, of course, forced labor, in order to get the crops grown that they wanted grown in the South. Without slavery, you would not have had the economic development of the American colonies.
We also asked Professor Foner where the problem of racial violence began.
Africans were violently seized in their own home continent, violently transported across the Atlantic to the United States. The South was an armed camp in the 19th century. The militias, the whole white population was armed, so that slaves were well aware of the fact that if they tried any kind of resistance, they would meet a violent response.
So, we know that violence was used in the 1700s and 1800s to keep control over the slaves. Our country has supposedly advanced so much since slavery ended in 1865. Our question was, why does racial violence still exist today in our society?
You know, we have this continuous question of, is there an increase in racial violence, or is it simply that people are reporting it more or are more aware of it? I'm not sure what the answer is. I think that the difference, though, between now and 10 years ago or 20 years ago is that people inclined to commit racial violence, or in particular white people who are inclined to commit acts of violence against people who aren't white, feel much more comfortable doing that now than they did 20 years ago, because the atmosphere that exists in the city now seems it's more open towards doing that. That I think there was a tone that has been set by the mayor of New York. I think there was a tone that had been set by the President Reagan of the United States. How large the problem of police and racial violence is tied into the question of what's happening with the economy of the United States. You cannot look at the question of police and racial violence and not look at the question of the economy of the United States, and that with the problems the economy is having, not simply reflected in the ups and downs of Wall Street, the problems of the economy, when you look at the conditions that people, working people, are facing in this country, and not simply blacks and Latinos, but also white working people. The whole nature of the economy of the United States is changing. It doesn't produce anything anymore. Most of the things that are produced are produced outside of the country. the economy is becoming more technological, more word processing, financial. And in many instances, as you probably know, most of the youth are not being trained, particularly in New York City, to be able to occupy any of the jobs that occur that are developing. We're going to try and give people some really simplistic explanations for why the conditions of their life have gotten worse. And so basically what they tell white people is the reason your conditions are worse, the reason why your children are not going to enjoy a higher standard of living than you did and will probably be lower than what yours is because, you know what, there are all these black people over here and these Latinos, they're making babies, they're on drugs, they're collecting welfare, and they're your real problem. And that's the message they send across, but they send it in a lot of different ways. And let me give you an example. One way they send it is by really trying to create an image that black and Latino youth are really not human beings. Because if they're really not human beings, then it's much easier to abuse them. So when last April you had that incident in Central Park where the woman was attacked, but also there were other people attacked, and they weren't just white people, there were blacks and Latinos attacked by this group of youth. If you remember, they were referred to in the newspaper as the Wolf Pack. And the message you're sending to the listeners is, you're not dealing with human beings, you're dealing with a bunch of animals. And it's much different than the way that the youths in New Jersey who were accused of attacking one of their schoolmates who was mildly retarded. You know, these were just some jocks. These are some jocks who just, you know, they're a little misguided. They were out having a little fun or whatever, but they were always described as human beings. They were not described as being less than human. And see, those are the different ways that the message is being sent to white people, that the real problem is these animals over here, and if we could deal with them, then our problems would be resolved. They wouldn't be resolved in the real world, but you want to divert people from looking up where they should be looking, where the problem is, and you divert them by having them look across at people who really, in terms of their lives, are not much different than they are.
Hi, my name is Robert.
And I'm Anthony.
And lately we've been feeling kind of angry at the recent media coverage of the Bensonhurst and Central Park case and the way they misrepresent black and white youths.
Roger Wareham spoke of the media images of black and Latino youths as animals. He brought up many interesting points, but we're going to examine these points a little closer. Let's start out by looking at two articles from the New York Magazine which spoke about the Bensonhurst murder and the Central Park rape, which were both written by Michael Stone, a reporter for the magazine. On the surface, it looks like both issues, Michael Stone were treating both issues equally. They both have the same format, they almost have the same title, and they both have close-up photos of 7 suspects.
But are they really equal?
Well, we noticed that many people like to look at pictures before they actually read an article. If you fall into this category, let me ask you a question. Do you really examine the picture that you look at? Well, let's start out by comparing the pictures of the Bensonhurst murder and the suspects of the Central Park rape. As we look at these pictures, you can see that there's something seriously wrong. Let's notice one suspect by the name of Keith Mandela, who's 18 years of age. He looks like he has a prospective future ahead of him. He's clean shaven, his hair is groomed nicely, and he's also in a suit and tie. He looks like an all-around nice guy. He looks like he wouldn't do anything so terrible as participate in a racist attack. And let's notice another suspect by the name of Charles Stressler, who's also in a formal way of dress. And Charles Stressler is the one who has supposedly supplied everyone with bats to beat Yusef Hawkins and his friends with. He's in a formal way of dress, a suit and tie, clean shaven, and his hair is groomed nicely. And let's look at one more suspect by the name of Steve Cerari, who's also clean shaven, suit and tie. But notice this picture. He looks proud. He's smiling, like he's not ashamed of anything. But let's notice the fourth shown, which is James Patino, who's also in a suit and tie, clean shaven, and his hair is groomed properly. But we have one more suspect by the name of Joseph Fama, who seems like his pictures are being taken while he's arrested or while in handcuffs.
You know, Anthony, pictures of the Central Park suspects are totally different in dress and appearance. These pictures seem to be taken when they were being arrested. I wonder why Michael Stone, the reporter for this magazine, chose to use these pictures. What image is he trying to project of these black and white youth, black and Hispanic youth? Let's examine these pictures a little bit closer. They have their heads down. They're wearing t-shirts, hoods, and coats. Not one of these youths is wearing suit and tie. I don't understand. Why did Michael Stone chose these pictures instead of other pictures? Raymond Santana, one of the suspects, is pictured with his face not in the picture. It looks like he's guilty, without any question. What kind of picture is Michael Stone trying to paint of these kids? I thought people were supposed to be innocent to proven guilty. The impact of these images is one of guilty, without any question. But the impact of the Bensonhurst youths going to court in suit and tie is one that people might assume their innocence. Do we look like animals? Well, in referring to the Central Park suspects, the word band is used once. The word pack is used 10 times. The word gang is used 2 times. And wilding is used 5 times. Mayor Ed Koch is even quoted as calling them monsters.
Call us animals, I don't agree with them. Call us animals, I don't agree with them. Call us animals, I don't agree with them. They call us animals, I don't agree with them. They call us animals, I don't agree with them. They call us animals, I don't agree with them. They call us animals, I don't agree with them. I'll prove them wrong. The right is what you're proving them. Take heed before I leave to what I'm saying, or we'll all be on.
None of these animalistic words were used in the Bensonhurst article. Michael Stone used words such as whites, group of friends, mob, and Bensonhurst youths. He never mentioned the phrase wilding, never. But he did use the phrase hanging out. But do you notice that the words he used were more lightly phrased than the words used in the Central Park article?
Yeah.
Now, Michael Stone is referring to these youths as human beings.
If you still haven't gotten the idea of power of the words, let's look at an article in Time magazine called Wilding in the Night. This article deals with the Central Park rape case and the problem of violence between young people. Look at this subheadline. A brutal gang rape triggers fears that the U.S. is breeding a generation of merciless children. Now, isn't breeding a word used to describe animals mating? It's not used to describe human beings. Well, let's look at the words used to describe these Central Park suspects. We have roam, a word usually used, to describe animals, It's like, don't you get a feeling of animalistic animals? We have pack, a word used to describe dogs or wolves, usually. And then we have, last but not least, wilding, a word used by some youths in New York City.
Yeah, because Robert, I could tell you, hey, I'm going wilding tonight at this party. And I could mean, just going to have fun, go to bug out.
Yeah, but when the media puts it in headlines with words like breeding, merciless, bloodthirsty, mob, roam, pack, and rampage, it changes the meaning. The meaning becomes one of committing acts of violence. Now, who are they talking about? Do they just mean the Central Park suspects are wilding, or do they mean a whole generation of blacks and Hispanics are wilding? An impression on people reading articles like this one is one that they see a whole majority of black and Hispanics as naturally violent.
Well, the media is not making the suspects in the Bensonhurst article out to be naturally violent animals. Let's look at the New York Newsday article that presents Joseph Vama, who was accused of pulling the trigger and killing Yusef Hawkins. Now let's read this headline. Joseph Vama is learning disabled. Now, I haven't seen, headlines like this in the Central Park article. Let me quote something from that article that, I thought was real interesting. Medical reports filed as part of a 1982 legal malpractice suit indicated that Fama suffered head injuries at the age of 3 years old. And another portion in that article brings out that Another report filed as late as 1987 that farmer had an IQ of 72 or less. And then another portion that I thought was very interesting was Dr. Morton Finkel of Manhattan, who examined farmer in 1987, February of 87, stated that farmer suffered from cerebral contusion and an old skull fracture, contributing to an organic brain syndrome and minimal brain dysfunction, causing learning impairment. Come on, you know, why are they telling us about these learning impairments and injuries that farmer had? Are they trying to make it seem like he didn't have any control over himself? Or is it that the media is trying to make it seem that they're trying to take away from the real issue? And the real issue is that it was a racist attack.
Nah, look, we've come to the conclusion that the media provokes racial violence by giving each group a specific title and way of being. The media makes white people feel that, hey, these black people, they're animal-like. And they see this as a reason for them to fear them and to use violence to protect themselves. The cycle of imagery and language has been going on for years. Yusef Hawkins was caught in that cycle. The media seems to be making the bond stronger. The stronger the bond gets, the harder it is for us all to fight racism. It's time for us to fight this vicious cycle.
To learn what young people are thinking and doing about racism, we spoke to students from our school and around the city. We were glad to find that some youth feel strongly and are taking action to help put an end to the vicious cycle of racial violence. We hope that after hearing these young people, more youth will contribute to the fight against racism.
Young people today, as well as older people, to be aware and not be ignorant of this, because if you're ignorant, you don't get nowhere.
We don't want youth, black and white youth, to be blamed for the drug crisis. Come across the street for a rally against racism. This has been called by Students and Youth Against Racism and the Campaign for a People's Fight Back.
They should better their education and not worry about the problem too much, but be aware that it's there.
We mean that we will not tolerate any more funerals of sisters and brothers like Yusef Hawkins, and that we are demanding that the racist murderers, all of them, of Yusef Hawkins, be brought to justice.
I hope that after young people see this videotape, they'll want to contribute to the fight against racism, and hopefully we can make a difference.
Money for jobs, not jail. Money for jobs, not jail. Money for jobs, not jail. Money for housing, not jail. Money for housing, not jail. Money for housing, not
try to fix it without violence. You know, together with peace. You understand? No violence. We don't need violence.
The General Union of Palestinian Students. Please give a warm welcome.
I'm making this video and other people contributing to it. We're opening eyes to other kids, other youth, and by doing so, we help a lot of other people.
Not only will it make youths aware that racism is going on, but also the adults, because if they see that the youths are aware, then they'll wake up and stop being so prejudiced themselves.
in order to fight the power campaign. Fight the power.
We should, stand together and fight and protest and do as much as we can and try to stop this thing of racism, because it doesn't make any sense.
traveled onward, gathering from town to town, seeking every lost and found treasures unseen and were bound, singing, come on up, I got a lifeline, come on up to this train of mine, come on up, I got a lifeline, come on up to this train of mine. She said her name was Harrigan, and she drove on the underground railroad. 150 miles we traveled onward.